Hey, this is Ina, in with you in the fight back. And I got asked a question about, or rather a bunch of questions. A lot of them would be like, the US state is corrupt, but it's very good at doing stuff like enforcing capitalist relations abroad or enforcing neoliberalism abroad. And it's like, when people say they blame the US, do they mean the government, or do they mean some construction worker who doesn't really have a say in what's going on? Or it's like, where can I find a lot of this information kind of summed up? And I kind of wrote a short essay on the Marxist view of the state, which I try to get beyond some of the cliches if I can. And I also listed some sources. Some are theoretical, some are more, historical in the sense like the U.S. State, U.S. foreign policy, and the ones marked with asterisks, which you can find in the video description or in the transcript, which is found at my blog, and the link is there in the video description as well. The ones with asterisks are fairly easy to read, and I think they give a good overview. But you should really read them all, and you should do your own research as well. But I hope I got you started. And to the person who asked me this, I hope you'll excuse me, but I just want to kind of lay out the Marxist view of the state, kind of put things in some larger perspective theoretically. And furthermore, I think it's also important to address it because it's come up with me several times about conspiracy theories and scapegoating. So there's a postscript here that deals with that, and I'll address that. So anyway, to begin, the state is not seen by Marxists as some kind of neutral apparatus above classes. It does not serve the population impartially. It is not accountable to the common people, even in the most democratic republic. The state is, to put it very bluntly, an instrument of class rule. The state seeks to maintain and defend class domination and exploitation while holding down the lower classes that potentially threaten that rule. In capitalist society, what is the need for a state? Shouldn't government just be ruled back, as the libertarians claim, to let the wonder of the market shine? Well, despite the libertarian drug-induced dreams to the contrary, capitalist society needs a state. We live in a class society where there are haves and have-nots, to put it very simply. Under these conditions, the state is capital's command structure, which is required to maintain the overall reproduction of the system. In a sense, it's internal cohesion. This is because each particular capital or business acts in its own interest, profit, and not necessarily to maintain the system. That's why there's kind of environmental laws, because capital would pollute, without any regard, and in a sense they need environmental laws to kind of regulate that. That's not to say they're always enforced, but that's kind of why they're there. It's not necessarily because capitalists love the environment. It's kind of to protect the overall sustainability of the system. And the state functions for the needs of the capitalist class as a whole, against any particular capitalist who may get out of line and threaten the system as a whole. So a good example of this is when Nixon engaged in Watergate. He's, of course, an elite representative of the capitalist class. He was attacking other representatives of the capitalist class, i.e. the Democratic Party. Something needed to be done for him to be kept in check. But when Nixon's tactics were used against the left, there was no outcry, since these forces were fighting for the proletariat, and they kind of get ignored. That's the whole COINTELPRO FBI stuff. But going on, the state does not stand for any general or national interest of society, and when you listen to Barack Obama call for shared sacrifice from all people for the benefit of the USA, it's hypocrisy. It's a smokescreen. The capitalists simply equate their interests, their profit-making, with the national interest. The state works to maintain the defense of property. This defense has many means, both legal and illegal. From courts, police, the army, the secret police, whether this is the Gestapo or it's the CIA, and political murder. To pose a question, when you see the capitalists trying to maintain their rule, and during a strike, any strike, have the police ever intervene on the side of workers? No, they've always defended property. The state maintains the dominant property relations through several means. On the one hand, there is the role of politics and ideology. and I'll be getting into some of this a little later too. The economically dominant classes can exercise various forms of pressure on state officials, for instance, lobbyists. The economically dominant classes in the political leadership, this would be those who are, say, on Wall Street but not necessarily involved in the political process per se, but the political leaders who are not necessarily, engaged in business, but they tend to share the same values. And there can be a disagreement within the confines of the system, for instance, Democrats and Republicans. Despite moronic claims to the contrary, the Democrats are actually die-hard capitalists, just as the Republicans are. On the other hand, there is the structural role of the state. The state must ensure the accumulation and reproduction of capital through various means. And this we can see in laws that ensure a healthy business environment, making sure capital and can go freely, that money can be traded. If this is constrained, business will not function the way it should in a capitalist society. And the state also has some autonomy in its role of maintaining the overall system. So this isn't to say the state doesn't necessarily have to be involved in all aspects of capitalist society. In many cases, the capitalist system doesn't require state coercion. Not in the same way the feudal system does, because the state and the whole economic structure were fused in that way. For example, if you're fired, go on strike, the state may not intervene. You could have company police used to break a strike, and that's not the state. That's a private police force. This relative autonomy of the state can also serve an ideological purpose. State ideologists can claim that the state stands above all class interests and thus serves the national interests. But again, that's like a smokescreen. It's a relative autonomy. In its essence, the capitalist state maintains social cohesion of a class-divided society. Yet the forms of that state can vary greatly from a monarchy to a democracy to fascism. For instance, under bourgeois democracy, there is still the rule of the capitalist class. In a democracy, the workers tend to have the choice of representatives of the capitalist class who can misrepresent them, especially in the USA, Democrat, Republican. Workers don't make state policy, and if a democratic state doesn't respect the capitalist rules of the game, keeping business open, maintaining the basic system, the powerful resist. Yet there is more openness to labor, popular, socialist organizations in a democracy than under fascism, due to universal suffrage and the power of parliament. However, these popular movements only have so much room for maneuver. Should they rise to power, they would be constrained by the state, which is structured to keep in place capitalist modes of domination. Popular movements can also be co-opted by the state. A great example is in 1914. Socialist parties, supposedly revolutionary, rallied to support World War I and faithfully served capitalist interests. Popular movements can obtain reforms and concessions from the capitalist state, which is more likely under a democracy than under fascism. Capital tends to resist these reforms, which can range from labor laws, the 8-hour day, universal suffrage, the social safety net, and even a peaceful transition to socialism. Capital resists giving in to the demands of popular movements due to the fear that these reforms could go too far, infringe on property, and threaten their rule. Sometimes the reformers push their agenda and unleash radical demands for change, and capital seeks to overthrow them. This would be Allende in Chile, not just reforms from above, but popular movements from below. Yet some of these reforms can paradoxically help the state maintain order and social cohesion. The reforms can keep the masses loyal to the prevailing regime. If you got an 8-hour day, you got a social safety net. It's better than not having that. Many of these reforms, though, even if they serve an ideological role and serve to maintain social cohesion, are not necessarily enforced. For instance, safety laws at a factory. And despite the ideological purpose they may serve, capitalists seek to roll them back. For instance, neoliberalism rolling back the social safety net. Thus, the state is coercive. It seeks to maintain the dominant property relations through violence, army, prisons, police, CIA. And more than maintaining internal cohesion, the state also seeks international advantage. Imperialist states such as the US and the UK, to name just two, seek cheap labor, raw materials, and hegemony throughout the world. Imperialist states seek to keep the world markets open for business. Imperialist states also want to keep out rival powers, for instance, France, Russia, Japan. They also want to prevent independent movements that can challenge their rule, whether nationalist, socialist, communist. There's the threat of a good example that encouraged dominated states to break with capital and follow a different path. A great example of this is Cuba's role in Latin America and the consequent U.S. attempts at destabilization. Cuba has been a beacon of light in contrast to U.S.-sponsored regimes, for instance, Chile under Pinochet. On the international level, capital also uses violent and non-violent means to keep its control secure. This can range from CIA subversion, propaganda, sponsored again by capitalist countries, embargoes against a particular country getting on a line, coup d'etats, for instance, getting the military in there, sanctions, political murder, how many heads of state has the U.S. tried to kill? Too many, and military intervention, for instance, in Vietnam. However, the state is not wholly coercive, and this is something that I have to stress. According to Gramsci, part of the way the state maintains its domination or hegemony, I'm kind of using them interchangeably, is through consent. There's a process of legitimization involved, which is elicited by consent. This is the role of culture, ideology, and its various organs, political parties, churches, media, non-radical unions, and other associations. A shared ideology is also adhered to in order to promote social cohesion, i.e. the American dream or American exceptionalism. And for the media, we could see, for instance, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC. They all seek to elicit legitimization of the system. In a sense, the system gets ordinary people to accept their subordinate status as normal and not to question it. Yet ideology is not necessarily given, but can be a site of struggle. Worker and socialist movements need to engage in combating the predominant views of the capitalist system and win people over. This capitalist state, in whatever form, is not something that revolutionaries seek to seize, but destroy. We want a state, in the process of withering away, of the broadest democracy to realize communism. We cannot take hold of capitalist instruments to realize it. Do revolutionaries really need the CIA or corporate law? No, gone. So a little postscript here is on conspiracy theories and scapegoating, and I'll tell you a little personal story. I was discussing online with a friend via Facebook, and we started going on about the New World Order, George Soros, and everything. He's calling himself the leftist and saying all these bankers are controlling everything. And it just quickly led into anti-Semitism, and I blocked him as a friend, but I did want to address these conspiracy theories and scapegoating because they're dangerous, they're wrong, and they need to be combated. And I feel like it kind of fits here in the role of the state. So, to begin, there is no conspiracy in the rule of capital once you recognize it. It is how society and the state normally functions. This does not mean that capital doesn't seek to use conspiracy at times to enforce its rule. We can see this with the Holocaust. It was a conspiracy. The Wannsee Conference, Iran-Contra, Watergate, COINTELPRO. These are all real conspiracies. But that doesn't mean everything is controlled by some secret cabal of elites. And some examples we generally have are the IMF, international bankers, the Trilateral Commission, George Soros, the New World Order, Jews. And this is when the conspiracy theory is directed upward, and sometimes we have scapegoating, and this is where problems and social ills are not directed upward, just supposedly, but downward to excluded groups. In some groups, and we have examples would be Reds, immigrants, blacks, Catholics. These conspiracy theories by elites, or scapegoating at the bottom, tend to use forms of racism and bigotry, which is just wrong and should be combated every time it's brought up. They also are readily used by forces on the right wing, and again, sadly, by some so-called leftists. May on their right see an enemy, Jews, involved in some vast plot. This is simplistic and wrong. These conspiracy theories fail to recognize real power relations and social structures. Many of the socioeconomic and structural problems that these right-wingers address are real. Unemployment, rich getting richer, they affect you if you're a worker, whether you're right-wing or left-wing. Yet the force behind the problems is either a secret elite cabal or a marginalized group in some sense. Immigrants are stealing your jobs. History is not moved by conspiracy, though, but by broad class forces and structures. When it comes to conspiracies, the right tends to look at secret cabals and secret plots. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a famous anti-Semitic forgery from Tsarist Russia. They see these plots as the motor force of history. They reduce history to something totally subjective and individual instead of looking at the real structures of power. Conspiracy theories also frame social conflict as good and evil, not as part of a larger social totality. In general, when those on the right rely on conspiracy theory, they tend to trace all evil to a vast plot and cabal. In order to make everything fit, they have to play fast and loose with the facts. I mean, just ask someone saying the Jews are behind everything. In other words, they make illogical leaps. And my favorite is from the movie Cabaret, where one of the characters say all the Jews are bankers and they're also communists. It's illogical. It's stupid. Revolutionaries need to expose these conspiracy theories and the interests they serve. When it comes to scapegoating, whether we're talking Jews, Reds, Blacks, immigrants, Catholics, target is generally represented as an alien force that disrupts a normal, healthy society. Attacks on these marginalized groups or enemies in the eyes of the right as a source for social ills tend to reinforce the powerful. The myth of the enemy, other, helps to justify anti-democratic activities by state power and security forces. Nazi Germany attacking Jews, great example. The Red Scare in the United States, any of them actually. Scapegoating helps maintain social control and bolster the real capitalist elite's privilege and power. To revolutionaries, we need to show solidarity with the victims of scapegoating and attack the system of power and substitute communism for it. I hope this has been informative, and I hope it answered some of the many questions that come up when dealing with the state. And feel free to ask me more questions on this. And this is Ina. Until next time.